"Go die there, old man, just die." The words weren't shouted by a stranger in anger, but by a son to his father, a betrayal so cruel it carved deeper than any wound of the flesh. Imagine hearing those words from the very person you once raised, sheltered, and sacrificed everything for. It was more than abandonment. It was a declaration that your life, your worth, your very dignity no longer mattered. And from that moment, a storm of deception, greed, and resilience began to unfold. Before we dive into today's story, I recommend you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. If you enjoy this video, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 to let me know how I can make better content for you. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. I'm Walter Hale, and at 68 years old, I sometimes feel like my whole life has been written into the keys of the pianos I've spent decades repairing. After retiring from my small workshop in Cincinnati, Ohio, the rhythm of my days slowed down into a familiar pattern. Each morning begins in the same way. I brew a cup of strong coffee, sit at the worn wooden table in my kitchen, and look out the window toward the tall maple tree in my yard. Its leaves flame red in the fall, and in the stillness of winter, its bare branches remind me of how much life can strip away. My wife, Margaret, passed away 4 years ago after a long battle with cancer. Since then, silence has been my daily companion, except on Sundays when I head to the church to tune their old upright piano. I have a modest but steady life. My house is nothing more than a simple timber home in the North Side neighborhood. But every corner holds memories, holidays with my wife, birthdays for my son Brandon, and laughter from my grandson Mason. I still drive an old pickup truck, dented on the passenger side from when Margaret once misjudged a turn, but it runs faithfully. On the dashboard hangs a little keychain Mason made for me, bright red beads strung together with a shaky "Grandpa" scrawled on a tag. That truck is more than transportation. It's a moving archive of my family's story. My finances are straightforward. I've saved $240,000 over the years, a mix of careful spending and steady work, all tucked safely in an account at Riverbank. It isn't a fortune, but it's enough to know I won't be a burden to anyone. I pride myself on never owing a dollar to anyone, not even in younger years when money was tight. That independence is the legacy I wanted to leave behind, proof that a man could carry his family with hard work and dignity. Brandon, my only child, grew up in that same house. He's 39 now, a regional manager for a retail chain. He wears suits, talks quickly about growth metrics, and always seems glued to his phone. He married Kelsey, a woman who knows how to charm a room. At first, I thought she was a blessing for him, sharp, cheerful, and eager to be part of the family. But over the years, I noticed her words had two edges. When she asked how I was feeling, it felt less like concern and more like an assessment. She takes pictures constantly, posting perfect family snapshots online, making sure the world sees the polished version of our lives. The only person who feels purely genuine is Mason, their 9-year-old boy. He's the spitting image of his father at that age, curious eyes, always asking questions. I take him fishing at Indian Lake whenever I can. We pack peanut butter sandwiches and spend hours casting lines, whether the fish bite or not. He loves when I tell stories about his grandmother, and sometimes he'll hum along when I play Moon River on the piano. Mason keeps me tethered to hope, a reminder that love can skip a generation and come back fresh. Outside of family, I have Sister Eileen from church. She's a sprightly woman in her 70s, always ready with a warm smile and a cup of coffee after Mass. She reminds me often that I'm not as old as I think, that there's more life ahead than I assume. She's one of the few people who looks at me without calculation. And then there are my neighbors, who mention that developers have been snooping around the neighborhood, saying houses like mine could fetch $300,000 now. To me, those are just numbers. But when Kelsey heard them at a family barbecue, her eyes sparkled as though she had just spotted buried treasure. Inside my living room hang 3 photographs that summarize my life: the wedding picture of Brandon and Kelsey, a framed portrait of Margaret when she was young and radiant, and a faded snapshot of me playing Moon River at a family gathering. Margaret leaning on the piano, smiling as though the world belonged to her. Those images are anchors, holding me steady against the tides of time and loneliness. I thought the pattern of my days would continue like this, quiet, steady, and familiar. But life has a way of testing even the most ordinary routines. One late afternoon, I returned from the church with sheet music under my arm and set my coffee down on the table. That's when I noticed a cream-colored envelope resting beside my blood pressure pills. There was no return address, just my name typed neatly across the front. My stomach sank with a sense I couldn't explain. Inside, folded with precision, were legal documents already filled in with my name. I didn't yet understand what they meant, but in that moment I knew. The life I thought was secure was about to unravel. If you're still watching and feel the weight of this betrayal settling in, comment number 1 below so I know you're with me. Let's keep going. The cream-colored envelope didn't leave my mind for days. I had placed it on the kitchen counter beside my pills, staring at it every morning, as though the paper itself carried a pulse. Eventually, I couldn't ignore it any longer. I sat down, pulled the documents free, and read the bold heading at the top. Durable power of attorney. My name was already typed neatly into the lines, the spaces for signatures waiting at the bottom, like open jaws. It wasn't just a form for paying bills. The language was clear enough, even for an old man without a legal degree. This document would give someone, specifically Brandon, since his name was listed, authority to control my bank accounts, sell my home, make medical decisions, and even sign a do not resuscitate order if he thought it appropriate. A chill passed over me. My hands trembled not from age but from realization. This wasn't simple paperwork. It was a noose disguised as a safety net. That evening, Brandon and Kelsey came by. Brandon stood tall and businesslike, his tone brisk, as if he were presenting a quarterly report. "Dad, it's just precautionary," he said, sliding the paper toward me again. "If you ever fall or get sick, we can handle things right away. No delays." Kelsey leaned in, her smile syrupy sweet. "Everyone does this now, Dad. It's about protection. We only want the best for you." She placed a manicured hand on mine, the way a nurse might reassure a patient. The more they talked, the less I believed them. My instincts bristled like a watchdog. Margaret's voice whispered in my memory, words she once wrote in her journal. "If you feel uncertain, slow down. Truth hides in silence more than in noise." I cleared my throat. "I'll have Martin Whitaker look this over." "He's been my lawyer for years." Brandon's expression tightened. "Dad, don't you trust me? It's a standard form. You're making this more complicated than it is." I forced a steady tone. "Trust doesn't vanish because of caution, son. Martin will read it, then we'll talk." His jaw worked, as though chewing back a sharper reply, before he finally muttered, "Fine." After they left, I sat alone with the document. The house was too quiet. The tick of the clock felt louder than ever. Something about their urgency unsettled me. Why were they pushing so hard? The next morning, I called Riverbank. The young clerk on the line politely informed me that, yes, a family member had asked about account transfers in the event of incapacity. My heart pounded. "Who exactly?" I asked, but she only said, "Sorry, sir, I can't disclose the name." It didn't matter. I knew. Later that week, Brandon canceled a planned camping trip with Mason. He gave some excuse about emergency meetings, but his voice lacked conviction. Mason had been excited, talking about roasting marshmallows. The disappointment in his eyes stung me deeper than Brandon's lie. That Sunday, during dinner at Brandon's house, I stepped into the hallway to fetch my coat and overheard his voice from the kitchen. "Dad's old. He's not thinking clearly anymore." His words cut clean through me. I stepped forward, and silence dropped instantly when they realized I was there. Brandon's eyes flicked away. Kelsey busied herself with the dishes. Back home, I pulled out a small leather-bound notebook and opened to a fresh page. I wrote the date, then carefully noted every detail. Brandon's exact words, Kelsey's expression, the canceled camping trip, the call to the banks, the way the document had already been prepared with my name. I had never kept a journal before, but now it felt like a lifeline. Day after day, I kept adding entries, observations, overheard remarks, even the way Kelsey's tone shifted whenever she asked about my medication. It wasn't paranoia if the facts stacked up in ink before me. I hadn't signed a thing. The papers still sat untouched in the envelope, hidden in my desk drawer. But I felt as if I had stepped onto a slippery slope, the kind where every inch forward brought you closer to a fall you couldn't stop. Something in my life had shifted, something dark and deliberate, and the worst part was realizing it came from inside my own family. The sky outside had been gray for days, heavy with clouds. I watched them gather over the rooftops, and I understood. Storms rarely strike without warning. They start with whispers of wind, with shadows that stretch just a little too far. And now, I was standing at the edge of one, uncertain whether I had the strength to withstand what was coming. If you're still watching and can sense how the tension is starting to build, comment number 2 below to let me know you're following closely. Let's continue. It started with something that should have been trivial. A week after Brandon's insistence about safety, I was standing on a small step stool in the yard, replacing the bulb on the porch light. The evening was calm, the sun barely hanging above the tree line, casting long shadows across the grass. I had done this task countless times before, but as I reached upward, the stool shifted on uneven ground. My balance slipped. I caught myself with one hand against the wooden frame, but for a moment my body lurched dangerously forward. Before I could steady myself completely, I heard the click of a phone camera. Brandon, who I hadn't even realized was visiting, stood with his device raised, filming as if he had been waiting for this very stumble. "Careful there, Dad," he said with a smirk that didn't match his words. This kind of thing could end badly. He didn't reach to help me, didn't move toward me, just recorded. The humiliation hit harder than the slip itself. I had been a builder, a provider, a man who repaired his own roof. Now my son treated me like fragile glass, collecting evidence of my weakness. The next morning, a knock on the door broke the stillness. A woman stood outside holding a clipboard, her badge identifying her as Dana Brooks, caseworker from Adult Protective Services. She explained in a professional but rehearsed tone that an anonymous concern had been raised about my ability to live safely alone. My gut tightened instantly. This was no coincidence. "I've never needed help living on my own," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Who filed this complaint?" "I can't disclose that," she replied evenly. "But we are required to make a home visit when concerns are raised." She walked through my house as if she owned it, inspecting the kitchen, the stairs, even the medicine bottles on the counter. The air felt suffocating, as though my life had suddenly been put under a magnifying glass without my consent. That afternoon, Brandon arrived unannounced. He claimed the agency had recommended I undergo a 72-hour evaluation at Maple Crest Care, the local nursing facility. His words were dressed as concern, but the steel edge beneath them was obvious. "It's just temporary, Dad. They'll check your reflexes, your memory, your strength. You'll be back home before you know it. It's for your own good." My pulse hammered. Every instinct screamed this was a trap, but Brandon already had paperwork in his hands. Forms with official stamps, pre-signed approvals. Dana Brooks had apparently filed her report, and Brandon wasted no time acting on it. He positioned himself as the helpful son steering me into care. The choice was gone before I even opened my mouth. When I arrived at Maple Crest, the first thing they did was take my phone for safekeeping. The polite tone didn't mask the control. My request to call my lawyer, Martin Whitaker, was brushed aside with a smile. "After your initial evaluation," they promised, which meant never. The room was small, too clean, its white walls devoid of personality. It felt less like a place of care and more like containment. But not everyone wore the mask of control. A young nurse named Ava Morales entered with a gentleness in her eyes. As she checked my vitals, she lowered her voice and asked, "Do you have someone who can represent you legally?" Her tone carried quiet urgency, like someone who saw through the layers of this arrangement. Before I could answer, visiting hours began. Brandon walked in, his suit crisp, his expression controlled. Ava left us alone. He leaned close to the bed, his voice dropping from feigned concern to venom. "Go die there, old man. Just die." His words sliced through me, crueler than anything he had said before. For a moment, my anger threatened to explode, but I forced myself into calm. Outrage was what he wanted, to paint me as unstable. Instead, I breathed, steady and cold. I asked for paper and a pen. They thought it was to scribble idle notes, but I wrote a letter to Sister Eileen, the one person in town I knew would act without hesitation. In it, I begged her to contact Whitaker and explain my situation. It was a fragile lifeline, but it was mine. That night, as Brandon left, I saw him in the hallway, shaking hands with Dr. Leonard Pike, the director of Maple Crest. The two men smiled like business partners closing a deal. Their handshake lingered, their eyes meeting with unspoken understanding. It was then I realized this was bigger than a greedy son. This was a network. Brandon, the facility, perhaps even more, working together to strip me of freedom, dignity, and resources. My fall from the stool had not been an accident of chance. It had been the first blow in a war my own son had declared. And as the walls of Maple Crest closed in, I knew I had to prepare for battles yet to come. If you're still watching and can feel the storm about to break wide open, comment number 3 below so I know you're here with me. Let's press on. The first morning inside Maple Crest Care began with tests. They called them routine assessments, but I quickly realized they weren't routine at all. A nurse I didn't recognize asked me to recall a series of words, then interrupted me before I could answer. Another demanded I walk across the room without using my cane, scribbling notes when I stumbled slightly on the linoleum. Every question, every observation felt carefully chosen to paint me as incapable. I was no longer a man with a long history, with decades of self-reliance and work. I was being reduced to a collection of supposed weaknesses. When I asked for the results, the staff smiled politely and said, "These go directly into your file." A file, I realized, that would soon be in Brandon's hands. By midday, I attempted my first act of resistance. There was a shared telephone at the end of the hallway. With some effort, I made my way to it, waiting for a moment when staff weren't nearby. I dialed Martin Whitaker's office number, my trusted attorney who had handled everything from property sales to minor disputes over the years. But before I could finish dialing, the floor supervisor, a brisk woman named Ms. Talbot, appeared at my side. "That phone is for approved calls only, Mr. Gray," she said firmly, hanging up before I had even spoken. "If you need to contact someone, we'll arrange it after your evaluation." The look she gave me made it clear that would never happen. My attempt to reach the outside world had been shut down with frightening efficiency. Back in my room, despair threatened to pull me under, but then Ava appeared. She moved quietly, slipping into the room during her rounds. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Mr. Gray, did you mean it when you said you needed to get a message out?" I nodded quickly, pulling the folded letter from beneath my pillow, the one I had written the night before. "To Sister Eileen. She'll know what to do." Without hesitation, Ava slid the letter into her pocket. "I'll make sure she gets it," she promised. That single moment of trust lit a spark inside me. For the first time since Brandon forced me into this place, I felt a thread of hope. But Brandon wasn't finished tightening his grip. That afternoon, he arrived with Dana Brooks from Adult Protective Services. They stood at the foot of my bed, Dana flipping through papers while Brandon leaned casually against the wall, smugness radiating from every gesture. "Mr. Gray," Dana began, "it's clear from our evaluation that you may not be safe on your own. Brandon has agreed to take temporary guardianship until a formal court review can be scheduled." I clenched my fists under the blanket. Temporary guardianship. The words rang like a sentence. Brandon smiled faintly, as if victory was already sealed. Later, when they stepped into the hallway, I shuffled close to the door and listened. Brandon's voice carried clearly. "Yes, the paperwork is done. Once the guardianship is confirmed, I'll need immediate access to his retirement accounts. No, it won't be a problem. Just process it as a transfer for care expenses. He won't know the difference." The words punched the air from my lungs. My son wasn't just trying to confine me. He was preparing to drain every cent I had earned under the guise of looking after me. Fueled by fury, I tried another route. That evening I requested writing materials, saying I wanted to journal. Instead, I drafted a formal complaint addressed to the board of Maple Crest, detailing my concerns and Brandon's manipulation. I slipped it into an envelope and handed it to the evening orderly. Hours later, the same envelope was returned, unopened, with a note. This is not within patient privileges. Every door I tried was slammed shut. The sense of entrapment clawed at me, but so did something else, resolve. If official channels were blocked, I would find unofficial ones. I thought about Brandon's arrogance, his belief that no one could stop him, that overconfidence would be his weakness. Night fell heavy over Maple Crest. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, when the door creaked open. Ava entered, closing it quietly behind her. "She got your letter," she whispered. "Sister Eileen knows. She's already contacted your lawyer." I exhaled a shaky breath. Relief swept through me like water over parched earth. For the first time since I had been dragged into this place, I wasn't fighting alone. Yet, even with this fragile thread of hope, I knew the war had only just begun. If you're still watching and the struggle feels more real than ever, comment number 4 below so I know you haven't left. Let's move forward. The meeting was staged to look official, but everything about it felt rehearsed. They gathered me in a small conference room inside Maple Crest. Sterile walls, a long table polished to a gleam, chairs that smelled faintly of disinfectant. At the far end sat Dr. Leonard Pike, the director of the facility, flipping through a folder as if my life could be reduced to a few pages of typed notes. Dana Brooks, the social worker, perched beside him, her pen poised over a clipboard. And of course, Brandon, my son, slouched in his chair with an expression that hovered between satisfaction and impatience. Dr. Pike cleared his throat. "Mr. Gray, we've completed your preliminary evaluation. Our findings indicate significant decline in memory retention, reduced balance, and a clear risk of injury should you continue to live independently. Our recommendation is long-term supervised care." The words hit like bricks stacked on my chest. I forced myself to sit straighter. "That's nonsense," I said. "My memory is intact. My balance slipped once because you interrupted me during your test. I've lived on my own for years without issue. You've twisted observations into a lie." Dana raised an eyebrow, scribbling notes as if my anger only proved their point. "Mr. Gray, outbursts like this are concerning. They suggest impulsivity, a lack of control, symptoms we can't ignore." I slammed my hand against the table, the sound echoing off the cold walls. "What you're ignoring is the truth. I am not incompetent, and I demand the right to call my attorney immediately." Brandon leaned forward, his voice sharp and dripping with condescension. "Dad, you don't belong in that house anymore. You'll only ruin yourself and what's left of your money. Why can't you just accept that you're old and need help?" There it was, the mask ripped away. His voice quivered with frustration, but beneath it lay his real motive: my money. His words didn't just humiliate me, they crystallized every suspicion I'd carried since the day he walked me into this place. I caught Ava, standing silently at the back of the room, her eyes flicking from Brandon to me with something like alarm. And then, in a moment so brief it might have been missed, I noticed a glint near the bookshelf, a small black camera tucked neatly between 2 binders. Brandon's jacket was angled toward it, and I suddenly understood. He wasn't just here to manipulate me in person. He was recording, planning to splice my frustration into evidence of senility, proof for a judge that his father was unfit. My throat tightened, not with fear, but with fury. They were stacking the deck against me from every angle: medical reports, legal guardianship, even doctored recordings. I could see the net pulling tighter, every thread woven by Brandon's greedy hands. Dr. Pike spoke again, smoothing the papers in front of him. "Given these findings, we'll be recommending immediate guardianship proceedings. Brandon has already agreed to serve as your custodian. This ensures your finances and living arrangements are properly managed." Custodian. The word felt like shackles. My son wanted to become the keeper of my life, the key holder to my freedom. I forced myself to breathe deeply, steadying the anger that burned in my chest. If I exploded now, Brandon would win. But I looked him dead in the eye, letting him see that I wasn't broken. You've misjudged me, Brandon. You think you can bury me under paperwork and lies, but I will not disappear quietly. If this is war, I'll fight it with everything I have left. His smirk faltered for the briefest moment, a flicker of unease breaking through his arrogance. That was enough to fuel me. When the meeting adjourned, I shuffled back to my room, Ava trailing behind. Once we were alone, she leaned closer. I saw the camera, she whispered urgently. Brandon planted it earlier this week. He's trying to stage you as unstable. The confirmation chilled me, yet it also gave me resolve. At least I wasn't imagining things. Thank you, I whispered back. The walls of Maple Crest seemed closer than ever, the air heavier, but my mind was sharper, clearer than it had been in days. They had declared war, and they believed I was too weak to fight back. What they didn't know was that an old man with nothing left to lose can be the most dangerous opponent of all. I lay awake that night, the memory of Brandon's voice ringing in my ears, the sight of that hidden camera burned into my vision. The betrayal of my own flesh and blood cut deeper than any wound, but beneath the pain simmered a determination as solid as iron. They wanted me silenced. Instead, they had lit a fire. That night I could not sleep. The fluorescent glow from the hallway seeped under the door, slicing across the room like a reminder that I was not free. I lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the air vents, my thoughts spinning. Every memory of my past years rose up, building the family home with my own hands, teaching Brandon to ride a bike, standing beside my wife at church while she sang. I asked myself over and over, will I let my son bury me alive, or will I fight back? The weight of that question pressed harder than the mattress beneath me. My body was older, slower, but my mind was not gone. They wanted me to believe I was powerless, but the truth gnawed at me. Silence was nothing more than a slow death. When Ava slipped quietly into the room during her late shift, she found me sitting upright, eyes shadowed with fatigue but burning with determination. She sat on the edge of the bed and spoke softly, as if the walls themselves might be listening. Mr. Gray, if you want a chance, you'll need proof. Words alone won't survive against Brandon's narrative, but that camera he planted, it can cut both ways. If we can control what it records, you could turn it into evidence against him. Her suggestion was dangerous, but it made my pulse quicken. You mean, let him incriminate himself? I whispered. She nodded. Exactly. He thinks he's smart. But if you bait him into saying what he really wants, the money, the guardianship, the camera becomes your witness. I leaned back, the idea swirling through me. But then she added something that shifted the ground beneath us. And there's another thing. Dr. Pike isn't as untouchable as he pretends. Years ago, when I was still a trainee, I overheard whispers about missing funds from the facility budget. A staff nurse filed a complaint, but it was buried. If you press the right buttons, he might back down to protect himself. The revelation startled me, a director caught in his own corruption. Suddenly, the fortress of Maple Crest didn't seem so impenetrable. The system was rotten from the top down, but rot could be leveraged. Still, doubt clawed at me. If I failed, if they caught me scheming, I could be branded paranoid, unstable. They could lock me here permanently and throw away the key. The risk was crushing. My thoughts drifted to my wife. She had passed 10 years earlier, but her voice still lived in me. I remembered her gentle hand resting on mine the day we signed the deed to our house. This will always be our safe place, she had said. I had promised her then that I would protect it. That promise still bound me. Brandon might be my blood, but he would not turn her memory into ashes. By dawn, I had my answer. I would not fade into submission. If the price of resistance was danger, I would pay it. Better to fight and fall than to be erased without a sound. When Ava returned the next evening, I told her my decision. I'm going to use his own trap against him. I'll give Brandon the stage he craves and let his greed do the rest. Her eyes flickered with both worry and admiration. It's risky, Mr. Gray. But if we prepare carefully, it might be your only chance. We whispered a plan between us. The next time Brandon visited, I would feign confusion, ask questions that tugged at his temper, prod him until the mask slipped. Ava promised to adjust the angle of the hidden camera so that it captured every word clearly. If fate was kind, Brandon would expose himself in his arrogance. When she left, I sat alone by the window, watching the lights of the small town shimmer in the distance. Beyond those lights stood my house, my memories, everything Brandon wanted to strip away. My reflection stared back from the glass-lined face, tired eyes, but still burning with resolve. I whispered to myself, a vow more binding than any prayer. Tomorrow, I stop being their victim. Tomorrow, I start the fight. If you're still watching and can sense the impossible choice hanging in the air, comment number 5 below so I know you're still by my side. Let's see what happens next. The morning after the disastrous meeting, 2 orderlies arrived at my room before dawn. They didn't bother to explain. One simply said, "Doctor's orders," as they guided me down the hall. My steps echoed on the linoleum, each one heavier than the last. They brought me to a wing of maple crest I hadn't seen before, a sterile corridor with heavier doors, observation windows, and cameras watching every angle. A sign read, "Enhanced Care Unit." But I knew the truth. This wasn't about care, it was containment. Inside, the room was stripped of anything personal. No books, no clock on the wall, not even the pen I had used to write my desperate letters. It felt less like a room and more like a cell. The door shut with a metallic clang that reverberated through my chest. I had been downgraded from patient to prisoner. The days blurred quickly in this unit. Staff came and went, their faces impassive. One doctor, a tall man with gray hair and a clipped tone, suggested I might need a stronger dose of sedatives to regulate my mood swings. His words made my stomach clench. They weren't just trying to silence my voice. They were preparing to dull my mind, to erase the very clarity that kept me fighting. Every hour I was watched. Even my meals were observed, as though they expected me to choke on purpose. The fluorescent lights never dimmed enough at night, leaving me trapped in a haze of half-sleep. My body was confined, but what gnawed at me most was the isolation. I could not speak freely, could not reach out, could not even feel the sun. Yet in that bleakness, a stubborn ember of resistance burned. I repeated to myself, this is their move, not the end. If they are pushing this hard, it means they're afraid. That thought kept me alive, even when despair whispered otherwise. Brandon came the second evening, striding into the observation room with a lawyer at his side. A man in an expensive suit who looked at me the way one looks at a file, not a person. Brandon's confidence filled the space. He told me almost casually that he had already filed the petition for permanent guardianship. "You won't have to worry about a thing, Dad," he said, his grin too wide. "I'll handle your finances, your house, everything. You can just rest." His lawyer nodded in agreement, sliding papers onto the table for my review, though I was in no position to sign them. I said nothing, just met Brandon's eyes. He mistook my silence for defeat. That arrogance was his blind spot. But once they left, the silence of the room pressed harder than ever. Doubt crept in. What if Ava couldn't help me? What if Sister Eileen had never received the letter? What if Whitaker, my trusted lawyer, was too late to intervene? The thought of living out my final years sedated in this sterile wing, while my son stripped away everything I had built, nearly broke me. I thought of my wife, her laughter in the kitchen, her hands in the garden, her quiet strength that had steadied me through decades. I had promised her our house would remain a haven, the place where memories would live long after we were gone. And now Brandon wanted to sell it off like just another property on the market. The guilt was unbearable. What had I done to raise a man capable of such betrayal? Then, as despair dragged me toward surrender, a knock sounded. Ava slipped into the room under the pretense of checking vitals. She leaned close, whispering quickly, "Don't give up. Sister Eileen got your letter. She's already spoken with Whitaker. They're digging into Brandon's finances. Evidence is stacking against him. You just need to hold on." Her words lit a fire inside me, though I kept my face neutral under the watchful eyes of the cameras. Hope wasn't gone. The walls might hold my body, but the truth was still alive outside. When Ava left, I sat on the edge of the narrow bed, the echo of the door locking behind her ringing in my ears. I stared at the sterile white walls and clenched my fists. They could lock me inside these walls, strip me of my belongings, even try to drug me into silence. But they could not chain my will, not yet. The days in the enhanced care unit stretched on like endless shadows, but one evening Ava slipped into my room during her late shift, her eyes bright with urgency. She leaned close, speaking in a voice no louder than a breath. "Mr. Gray, your lawyer has filed an emergency objection to the guardianship petition. Whitaker is moving fast. He's demanding the court hear your side before anything permanent is signed." For the first time in weeks, I felt my chest loosen. A door I thought sealed shut had cracked open. I wasn't beaten yet. Hope, though fragile, pulsed through me like a forgotten heartbeat. We sat together in that sterile room, plotting like conspirators. Ava reminded me of the hidden camera Brandon had planted. "He thinks it's his weapon," she whispered, "but we can turn it into yours. If you can push him to reveal what he really wants, your money, your house, his control, the recording will show the truth." The idea was dangerous, but brilliant. Brandon's arrogance was his weakness. He believed himself untouchable, too clever to be caught. If I could stoke that arrogance, let him speak without restraint, the very device meant to condemn me could become his undoing. Ava promised to adjust the camera discreetly, ensuring the angle caught every word. "If he explodes the way I've seen him do, it will be undeniable," she said. I gripped her hand for the first time, the warmth of human solidarity grounding me. "You're risking your job for me," I murmured. "Some things are worth the risk," she answered simply. But there was another card to play, one Ava revealed with hesitation. She told me about Dr. Pike's past, whispers of embezzled funds, a staff nurse's buried complaint, a scandal smothered before it reached daylight. I sat in stunned silence, the pieces falling into place. The polished director wasn't invincible. He carried his own cracks, and if Whitaker dug deep enough, those cracks could split wide open. I thought about it all that night, my mind racing as I lay on the narrow bed. Fear clung to me like the stale air in the room. If I tried and failed, they could brand me delusional, dangerous even. They could medicate me into oblivion, erase me from my own life. Yet the alternative, silence, was no better. Silence meant surrender, and surrender meant letting my son strip away everything I had built, even the memory of my wife's promise that our home would always remain ours. I remembered her voice, soft but steady, the day we signed the deed. "This house is our safe place, Walter. Keep it safe," I whispered into the dark. "I won't break that promise." The next morning, I felt something different coursing through me. Resolve. My hands still trembled with age, my back still ached, but my spirit stood taller than it had in weeks. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled me. That evening, Ava returned, carrying a message. "Sister Eileen says the congregation is starting to talk. Brandon's been bragging too loudly about guardianship papers. People are suspicious. It won't take long before Whitaker can use that to your advantage." The thought of my church family rallying, even unknowingly, around me filled me with strength. Brandon had underestimated the power of community, just as he had underestimated the old man he thought could be silenced. As Ava adjusted the angle of the bookshelf camera, I rehearsed in my mind what I would say the next time Brandon entered. I would not scream or lose control. That was his narrative, not mine. Instead, I would ask questions, prod him gently, let him talk himself into the truth. His temper would do the rest. I turned toward the door after Ava left, the dim hallway light spilling into the room. My reflection in the window looked back at me, aged, yes, but far from broken. They thought they had stripped me of everything: freedom, dignity, control. What they had really done was arm me with the very tools of their downfall. "They think I'm finished," I whispered to the empty room, my voice steady, "but they've given me every weapon I need. Now I'll use them all." If you're still watching and can feel hope fighting its way back through the darkness, comment number 6 below so I know you're with me until the end. Let's go on. Brandon came to visit 3 days later, swaggering into the room as if he already owned everything I had left. His smile was practiced, but there was arrogance in his stride that couldn't be hidden. He pulled a chair close to my bed and leaned forward, his voice dripping with condescension. "Dad, this will all be over soon. The court date is set, and after that you won't have to worry about bills or decisions. I'll take care of it all." I let my shoulders sag, feigning weakness. My voice was soft, wavering as though my strength was slipping. "So, you'll control everything?" I asked. "The house, the accounts, even the savings your mother and I built?" Brandon's smirk widened. "Of course. Someone has to be responsible. You can't handle it anymore. The money will finally be put to good use. My use." He chuckled, leaning back as if the victory was already in his pocket. I pressed him further, keeping my tone meek. "And what happens to me?" His eyes hardened. "You'll stay here. They'll keep you medicated, quiet, out of trouble. Honestly, Dad, it's better this way. You've lived long enough, now you can fade, and I'll live the life you could never give me." Each word was a dagger, but I stayed calm, nodding slowly as if resigned. What Brandon didn't know was that the bookshelf camera, adjusted by Ava, caught every second of his tirade. His arrogance, his greed, his contempt. It was all preserved in sharp clarity. Later that night, Ava slipped in and quietly retrieved the memory card. Her eyes glimmered with determination. "This is it," she whispered. "This is the proof Whitaker needs." The next morning, Whitaker stormed into Maple Crest, armed with more than just the recording. Sister Eileen had unearthed documents showing Brandon had already tried to move funds from my retirement account into a private investment under his name. Combined with the footage of Brandon boasting about his plans, it was a hammer blow. Whitaker demanded an emergency hearing, and the court granted it. The hearing was held in the county courthouse, a modest building where justice still mattered. They brought me in, thinner and weaker than before, but with a fire in my eyes. Brandon sat across the room, his lawyer beside him, both brimming with smug confidence. He began with his well-rehearsed speech about being the dutiful son, claiming he only wanted to protect his aging father. Dana Brooks, the social worker, nodded along, clearly prepared to support his narrative. Then Whitaker rose, calm but commanding. "Your Honor, my client is not incompetent. What he has endured is nothing short of entrapment and financial exploitation." He handed the judge a small drive. "This is a recording from Maple Crest. It speaks for itself." The courtroom fell silent as the video played. Brandon's voice filled the chamber, sneering. "The money will finally be put to good use. My use. You've lived long enough. Now you can fade." Gasps rippled through the spectators. Dana Brooks's face blanched, her pen frozen above her clipboard. Even Brandon's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Brandon's composure cracked. "That's out of context," he shouted, but his voice trembled. Whitaker didn't stop there. He presented bank documents showing Brandon's attempted withdrawals, along with testimony from Sister Eileen about his boasting in the community. Finally, he revealed records of Dr. Pike's past financial misconduct, cornering him into silence. Pike, once so smug, looked down at the table, sweat beading his forehead. His credibility collapsed. The judge leaned forward, his expression grim. "Mr. Gray is clearly competent. The petition for guardianship is denied. Furthermore, the evidence presented raises serious questions about Brandon Gray's conduct. This court is ordering a full investigation into potential financial exploitation and fraud." Brandon's face drained of color. He tried to protest, but the bailiff's warning glare silenced him. The victory wasn't just legal, it was moral. The mask had been ripped away for all to see. When the gavel struck, I felt chains fall from me. The court ordered my immediate release from Maple Crest. For the first time in weeks, I stepped outside into the fresh air, sunlight spilling over me like a blessing. Sister Eileen was waiting, her arms open, her smile warm. Neighbors and church friends gathered, offering support I hadn't even realized was still mine. Back at home, I stood in the doorway of the house my wife and I had built, my hand pressed to the familiar wood. Every corner of the place breathed memory, promise, and love. I whispered, "Home, still mine." The words were not just relief, they were triumph. The battle had scarred me, yes, but I was standing. I had faced betrayal, entrapment, and humiliation. Yet in the end, truth had cut through lies, and justice had carried me back to freedom. The house was quiet when I returned. Sunlight streamed gently through the windows, casting golden stripes across the hardwood floor. The scent of wood and old books filled the air. My house, my sanctuary, still intact despite the storm it had just weathered. I lowered myself into the armchair by the window, the same one where I had sat with my wife so many evenings, and let the silence settle over me like a balm. For the first time in weeks, I was not surrounded by guards or cameras or the sterile hum of a locked facility. I was home. Sitting there, I thought about the path that had brought me back. It had begun with subtle manipulations, a stumble on a step stool, whispered accusations of incompetence. What followed was betrayal so sharp it felt like it had pierced through my bones. The realization that my own son had plotted not to care for me, but to erase me. The courtrooms, the recordings, the battles of evidence and lies, they had all led here, to this moment of stillness. And as painful as it had been, the journey had taught me more about life than I had ever expected to learn in my final years. I understood now that betrayal most often comes not from enemies, but from those closest to us. The wound is deeper because it is personal, because it cuts through trust that was built over decades. But even in that darkness, there are lights. Ava, a nurse who owed me nothing, risked her career to protect me. Sister Eileen, whose faith guided her, carried my message into the world when I had no voice. And Whitaker, my lawyer, stood firm against a tide of lies and schemes. It was not blood that saved me, it was kindness, conscience, and courage from those who chose to stand on the side of what was right. Growing older had made me fear irrelevance. I thought society would see me as weak, disposable, easily replaced. And for a time, my son's words made me believe that lie. But as I sat in that courtroom, listening to the judge affirm my competency, I realized something profound. Age does not strip us of worth. We may move slower, we may lean on canes, but our experiences, our memories, our values, those are strengths no one can steal. The world often tells the elderly to sit quietly, to fade away, to surrender their independence as if it were inevitable. But dignity is not something handed out by the young. It is something we must claim for ourselves. It requires courage to say, I am still here. I still matter. I will not be erased. That fight, however exhausting, is worth everything. As I sat in my armchair, the late afternoon sun warming my face, I whispered to myself, we are never too old to fight for our dignity. The words felt true, not just for me, but for every man or woman who has been told their time is over. As long as breath remains in us, so does purpose. I closed my eyes and let the weight of recent weeks roll away. The bitterness of betrayal still lingered, yes, but it was tempered by the sweetness of justice. Brandon would face the consequences of his actions. His schemes had collapsed under the weight of truth. And though I carried the scar of his betrayal, I also carried the knowledge that I had stood firm when it mattered most. This house, this life, was still mine, not because of wealth or power, but because I had refused to surrender my will. That was the lesson. Our possessions can be stolen, our freedoms can be threatened, but the dignity we protect within ourselves is untouchable if we choose to defend it. Outside, I heard the faint laughter of neighborhood children playing in the yard, a reminder that life moves forward no matter the storms. I smiled faintly. Tomorrow would bring new days, ordinary and quiet, and I welcomed them. After so much chaos, peace was its own form of victory. In the stillness, I felt the presence of my wife, her memory woven into the walls of the home we had built together. I thought of her words, her faith in me, her promise that this place would always be our safe haven, and I knew she would be proud that I had kept that promise. Justice had been done, but more than that, dignity had been preserved. My story was not just about survival. It was a reminder to anyone listening that life is never over until we choose to stop fighting. I opened my eyes, breathed in the quiet air of home, and whispered a final thought. They tried to silence me. Instead, I found my voice. There are moments in life when the ground seems to shift beneath us, when the familiar becomes strange, and the people or systems we trusted reveal themselves to be fragile or corrupt. In those moments, it is easy to believe that dignity can be taken away, that age, vulnerability, or circumstance can erase who we are. Yet, what the story has shown is something far deeper. Dignity is not granted by others. It is claimed, defended, and reaffirmed within the quiet strength of the human spirit. Every betrayal, every attempt to silence or diminish, is also an invitation to rise. Pain, however cruel, is not only a wound but a teacher. From struggle comes clarity. From adversity comes the rediscovery of what cannot be taken: our integrity, our courage, our will to endure. These are not qualities bound by time, wealth, or circumstance. They are the essence of being human, and they shine brightest when tested. There is a truth that lingers beyond the particular details of any trial. Age does not mean the end of usefulness or relevance. Too often society treats the later years as shadows of what came before, dismissing wisdom and experience as burdens rather than treasures. But to grow old is not to fade. It is to carry the accumulated strength of decades. It is to know that storms have come before and been weathered, and that survival itself is a form of triumph. The greatest injustice is to tell someone that they no longer matter, that their voice is no longer needed, that their story has ended while their heart still beats. And yet, against this injustice there remains a deeper justice, one found not only in courts or laws, but in the undeniable truth of resilience. To stand up, even when weak, to speak out, even when silenced, to claim one's worth, even when others deny it. This is the quiet revolution that restores balance to the world. In this light, what seemed like defeat became transformation. The attempts to control, to confine, and to erase were, paradoxically, the sparks that ignited resolve. The very pressures designed to break the spirit instead revealed its unbreakable nature. The human will, tested by betrayal and humiliation, found its way back to strength. What was intended as a cage became a crucible, and from that crucible emerged not despair, but a deeper knowledge of freedom and justice. There is also a reminder here of the unexpected places where hope can be found, not always in the familiar, not always in those closest by blood, but often in small acts of kindness, in courage from unlikely allies, in the simple insistence that truth matters. In a world that can be quick to dismiss or exploit the vulnerable, it is these sparks of compassion that keep the fire alive. They prove that even when darkness gathers, light persists, carried forward by those who choose what is right over what is easy. And so, the message becomes clear. Life is not measured solely by possessions or control, but by the integrity with which we hold on to ourselves. Dignity is not passive, it is active. It demands that we resist erasure, that we confront injustice, that we affirm our worth not only in words, but in the choices we make when tested. Every life will face its storms: betrayal, loss, manipulation, or despair. These are not the end of the story, but chapters within it. The ending is written not by those who seek to diminish us, but by the strength with which we respond. To rise when pushed down, to protect what is sacred, to remember promises and honor them. These are the marks of a life fully lived. The reflection that remains is both simple and profound. No one is ever too old to fight for dignity, too weak to stand for justice, or too forgotten to reclaim a voice. The truest measure of resilience is not how loudly we speak, but how firmly we hold to what is right, even when silence or surrender would be easier. In the end, what matters is not how others sought to define us, but how we defined ourselves when the world pressed hardest against us. That is where freedom lives. That is where meaning is found. And that is where, no matter the years behind us, life proves it is never finished until we decide it is. These turning points remind us that setting boundaries and valuing ourselves is not just an act of courage, it's the foundation of living with dignity. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one lesson from this story that you feel connected to, and how will you apply it in your own life? Let's grow together by sharing our thoughts. If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, feel free to leave a 0. Your feedback helps us improve. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and spark reflection. Thank you for watching, and here's to living life with strength, honesty, and authenticity.